What's up, football fans? Welcome to the Extra Point. I am your host, Phil Ruskin, and joining me today, my nephew, Jonathan Goose Pereira. What up, nephew?
What's good, Unc? What's good? Happy to be here, man.
Load, good to have you. So I'm going to tell a quick story, and then I want you to tell a quick story because everybody's going to hear me address you as Goose today, and they're all going to be sitting at home going, Goose, they need to know the story. So before we tell your story of Goose, I just called you nephew, you called me Unc. The story for everybody at home was that Goose and I met through the gym a couple years ago, and we got to be friends outside of the gym. And the long story short is him and some of the boys started calling me Unc because apparently I'm old AF, which I'm cool with because it's a term of endearment, right? It's not like you guys are calling me names behind my back. Well, maybe you were, I don't know, but it's cool. I was cool with it, and so obviously when you got Unc, you got to have nephews. So that's how me and Goose became kind of Unc and nephew. But Goose, for the folks at home, tell us the story of Goose, man.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I guess not that crazy. It started off when I was pretty young, like newborn baby for the most part, and my dad just called me silly goose, called me goose man, just like wrestling around, just having fun, like dad and son. So we
Yeah.
do. Then started getting into baseball. So started that at about 4 years old or so. And there's a couple other Jonathans on the team. So if you got three Jonathans playing outfield and you got some dude yelling Jonathan, all of a sudden all three little kids are looking, trying to figure out what the heck's going on. Do I need to go left, right? So he shortened it, called me Goose. A couple other people heard it and like, oh, must be his nickname. I'm gonna call him Goose. So then it kind of made its way around the parents, made its way around the kids, got to high school and nobody knew my real name. And now I have a goose tattooed on my arm and it's stuck with me for
I love it, man. That's great. It's stuck. And look, if you've never been around little kids trying to play a sport, it is utter chaos. So being able to actually tell one kid what to do and actually have them listen is a massive win, no matter what that sport is. But the fact that you were able to be in the outfield, and you caught the ball, right? I mean, I'm guessing if you can do all
oh,
this run around, of course we caught the ball, right?
BP, my dad, he's got an eye for setting up the field, so he had me in perfect position every time. I made the
Wow.
catch, and I'm thankful for the nickname. There's a lot worse nicknames out there. Goose, I feel like is a
Right on, man. Well, I love it. So let's jump in. This is the Extra Point where we are all things fantasy football, but specifically we're focusing on Dynasty. Goose and I were chatting a little bit before the show and want to get into some player breakdowns today, want to talk about some strategy, but I purposely did not ask you a question that I'm going to ask you now because I didn't want you to prepare. I want you, this is the best way I can get your true, honest opinion. Everybody in the draft, everyone in a draft, I know I'm going to put you on the spot. Everybody in a draft wants to know, I'm in the middle of a round. Do I draft for positional need for my team? Or do I take that player that's the best available who maybe dropped a couple of spots and I shouldn't have had the opportunity to do? So the question, Goose, is when you're on the clock, do you draft for best available player or do you draft for that positional need? Now, I have an opinion. I'll answer it too, but I definitely want you to answer first.
that's a tough one, man. I wish you would have let me prepare for that one.
That's why I
If
didn't.
I'm on the spot, clock's running out. I think I go best available, and then potentially use that pair to flip, and then get the person I need for my position. So I'm gonna go best available, and then hopefully turn that around and get a good player for my position from somebody else in the league.
Okay. So you're thinking a little sign and trade action.
Exactly. Someone once told me it's almost like a rental. I may have heard that, so I'm thinking along those lines now.
Oh man, you must have been talking to someone with some good football opinions if they're using that word rental, man. I don't know who that could have been, but that's awesome. So, all right, all right. So I'll be honest, man, that's not a take I've heard. Everybody that I've talked to on that question either is one side of the coin or the other. So my opinion on the question is I think I won't say right because there is no right answer, but I think the safe answer is you draft for the best available simply because you may be getting a generational talent, right? So we're talking dynasty, we're talking these upcoming rookies. If you're on the 101 coming up in a startup draft, look, Bijan Robinson's the guy, in my opinion. Nobody needs a second opinion whether you should draft him or not. But if you're in that middle round and you're thinking, okay, look, I really need a running back because everybody in dynasty, everyone in fantasy is always looking for running backs. It's the most needed position, it's the most volatile position, and it's just everybody wants to have that three down guy. The reality is that you may not end up getting a running back, or you're ending up reaching for one of these later round running backs when you could be passing on an unbelievable generational talent in a wide receiver position. So to me, take the guy that's going to be best for fantasy football, take the guy that's going to probably be best for real football. And if it works out and you hit a home run, you always have another draft the next year. So that's my 2 cents. That's my take. But I'm totally okay if someone says, look, my running back room's pretty good, which no one's is, but let's just say you're that fortunate and you want to have that luxury pick and reach for that quarterback early, go for it. So, all right, Goose, we are talking Dynasty. I definitely want to hear what you're thinking about some of these rookies. We talked a little bit before the show. Give me, in your opinion, let's talk about single quarterback leagues. Who are the top 3 guys that you would draft? And assuming that we're relatively in agreement on those 3 players, everybody wants to know, what do I do at that 4th pick? Because I think the top 3 guys are fairly consistently ranked across the industry right now. How do you see these top 3 guys getting drafted?
So are we going 3 for the quarterback, or are we going just who's going to be the first 3 off the board?
Yeah, I think if you're in a single quarterback league, it changes like how we value the quarterbacks. You may see those quarterbacks slip to the, latter part of the first, maybe even that second round. So the skill position guys, what are you thinking for the top 3 guys? How do you see those 3 positions shaking out?
I'm honestly leaning more towards receivers, even though I know that running back is a tough position to get quality at, especially right now. Pass heavy, I feel like in the NFL. I do like Bijan Robinson a lot. I do like Jahmyr Gibbs a lot. I'm iffy on Shaw Barnett out of UCLA. Quentin Johnston, TCU, big on him. So I'd probably go. Bijan would be my one guy. I think I'd go Jahmyr Gibbs would be 2. And then looking wide receiver, I like Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, big body receiver. TCU, obviously big run to the national championship game, kind of that contested catch guy. I've heard a lot of comps for him were like Mike Evans, right? Like
Yeah.
6'3", 215, like throw a ball up in the corner route, let him go up and just beat his defender to go and get that touchdown for you. So yeah, I don't have any issues with it, right? I think at the end of the day, again, we just talked about, do you draft best available? Do you draft positional need? Look, we don't really know what's going to happen. All we can do is project. I think ultimately draft capital means a lot, right? So draft capital, for the folks at home that are listening that maybe don't know what that means, what is the actual NFL drafting this player to be? Is this a first round pick that they're investing in? Is this a second round pick? Is this a developmental player that they think is a guy who, maybe to your point about receivers, is going to come in and be like the wide receiver 2 on their team and eventually be the guy? So yeah, I think it's a good list. I like your thought process. So let me ask you this then. You're at the 104. Robinson, Gibbs, and Johnston are all off the board. Who's the players that you're looking at, and who do you ultimately take?
They're gone. I'm gonna butcher this dude's last name, and like by the off chance he ever hears me saying this. But we're going Ohio State. I'm gonna go Jackson Smith, whatever that last name is. That I mean, I like him. I know a little bit of hamstring issue, but 2021 put up a lot of good numbers, 9 touchdowns, a lot of catches. So he gets the receptions. He's proven that he can get some yards. He's proven he can get in the end zone. Hamstring worries me a little bit, but not enough to where I'd pass on it.
Yeah, so we'll make it easy on you. JSN, very excited. We talk about nicknames of Goose, Unc, Nephew. Let's just JSN. That's as simple as it gets, right?
It's a lot easier on the mouth right there.
There it is. So I like JSN a lot. I think the one thing about JSN that people don't remember from that Ohio State team in 2021 was, listen to this receiver room. Garrett Wilson, first round pick by the New York Jets. Chris Olave, first round pick by the New Orleans Saints. Both of those players, when interviewed, have both come out and said JSN was the best receiver on that team that year, and that was the team that made the run to the playoff. So when you have 2 guys that are rookie of the year talk in the conversation for rookie of the year last year, and are both first round picks by their respective teams saying, yo, I was in that crew and I wasn't even the best guy, I don't know,
Hmm.
a better compliment to get from your teammates to say, yo, this kid that's coming out was better than we were.
Right.
That's pretty high praise, man. That's pretty high praise. So, all right. So I'm gonna ask myself because I have to, and I've been over this 100 times. What do you do at the 104? I personally have the 104 in one of our dynasty leagues, so I'm a little selfish, but also I think that those top three picks are pretty universally agreed upon, right? Bijan Robinson seems to be the universal 101. JSN and Jahmyr Gibbs are kind of in that like 2-3, kind of however you personally view them is fine. I'm okay if you have JSN at 2 or 3. You like Johnston. I don't really have an issue if you're looking for a bigger body receiver. For me, let's say Gibbs, Johnston, or excuse me, Gibbs, JSN, and Robinson are off the board. I think for me, I'm probably looking at a player like Jordan Addison or Quentin Johnston or Zach
Okay.
or Zach Charbonnet. Those are the three players that I would consider at the 104 in a single quarterback league. Reason being, quite simply, I think Addison's a burner. He's got great speed, can take the top off of defense. I'm a little less worried now with his size because you've seen a Devonta Smith come in the league, and I won't say dominate, but like dude's been successful, right? Like there's no issues with Devonta Smith. And even before the Eagles traded for AJ Brown, Devonta Smith had a good rookie season. And Addison's kind of in that like smaller frame burner, like he's a good comp. I think the other players that I would look at is Zach Charbonnet. I think if you look at Bijan as the clear cut 1 and Gibbs as the clear cut 2 and running backs, Charbonnet for me is the clear cut 3. And no disrespect to the rest of the rookies, I think there's a drop off. Like that's my tier. Like I think Bijan's in a tier of his own, right? He's tier 1, only one player. I think Gibbs and Charbonnet can be those tier 2. And then I think it's really a good question of like, what do you value when it comes to running backs for 4 through the rest of the draft? Because in my opinion, they're kind of all the same. So I would look at Johnston as that big bodied wide receiver. I'd look at Addison as kind of that Devonta Smith comp. I'd look at Charbonnet. For me personally, on the clock at the 104, I'd probably go with Addison. I think he has the most translatable skills. And I think there's a pretty good chance draft capital wise that he is a first round pick. I've heard rumors of the Steelers potentially taking him. So even though Addison's coming out of USC, he did play at Pitt and transferred into USC. Kenny Pickett was his quarterback at Pittsburgh. So you could have that college draft pick that becomes that NFL player combination. And you're seeing some of that with Jalen Waddle and Tua in Miami, right? Jalen Hurts and some of these guys. So that's where I'm at.
I really like that Jordan idea. I like that pick. I like his route running. Both seasons, Pitt and USC put up great numbers. And yeah, it could be considered undersized, but there's a lot of other guys that are even smaller than that. You got like a Josh Downs and Nathaniel Dell type, just
Yeah.
real tiny. So I think Addison's a great pick. And I think that he would fit well if he did go to Pittsburgh, and that little tie to Pickett would be awesome. And I know that Pittsburgh in the past has been a little USC happy, and maybe it's only just the one that stands out in my mind, but Juju coming out of USC, I
Yeah.
know they're high. So maybe they have a little gravitation towards receivers from USC. And it would make sense. They had a hell of a year. Good program.
Yeah, and I think you look at Chase Claypool getting traded last year. Really, what does that do to the wide receiver room, right? You have George Pickens, you have Pat Freiermuth, who's a tight end, but probably is your second best wide receiver on paper. Because Deontay Johnson, he signs a 2-year extension. I like Deontay Johnson, but Deontay Johnson has been kind of I won't call him a gadget player, but he's been a kind of short rub route kind of screen player. And that's what Roethlisberger did so well, right? Because Roethlisberger obviously was never going to leave the pocket, physically couldn't leave the
Yeah.
pocket. But
Quarterback.
he was that guy. If you look at the A dot, right, the average depth of target, it's inside 5 yards. So Deontay Johnson grabbing the ball inside of a 5-yard route and then doing his damage, to me, that's just not Kenny Pickett's game.
Right.
So I was super high on Deontay Johnson a couple years ago. I still like him. I still think he's a good player. I think eventually what you're going to see in this offense is George Pickens become the guy. Probably Johnson get traded, in all honesty, after this contract expires in the next 2 years. I just don't see the Steelers investing into him long term. And historically, the Steelers don't invest in wide receivers. They pay their running backs, they pay their O-line, they pay their quarterbacks. So And they've always had a good track record of drafting well. So I think Jordan Addison to the Steelers, if that works out, could be a name to monitor for a little while. But all right, man, let's switch gears because this is what everybody wants to know. The 2-quarterback league. This is where things get really tight. So when you have 2 quarterbacks that you're required to roster on your dynasty team, now all of a sudden the dynasty rookies, the quarterbacks shift from that late first round, early second round to we're definitely talking about the 101, the 102, possibly the 103. And I think, and I'll go second, I want to hear your opinion here. I think you could see a dynasty draft be very similar to what the real NFL draft is, where now people are saying you could see 4 quarterbacks come off the board in the first 4 picks of the NFL draft. You could see 3, maybe 4 quarterbacks come off in the dynasty draft. So give me the top 3 players in a 2-quarterback system and how you see that shaken out.
Another tough one. Been on the fence a little bit. I mean, obviously, if you have 1 overall, you need quarterback. Bryce Young. I think everybody's kind of, hey, this is going to be the guy. You know what you're going to get. Playmaker, proven himself. A little small, but still has proven he can get the job done on the field. The only argument is that CJ Stroud might have a higher ceiling. So maybe not right now. Bryce Young's probably the clear cut. This is the easy bet. You know what you're going to get. But long term, is Stroud going to give you more? He's got good accuracy, good at anticipating movement in the pocket, and then the Georgia game, balled out. Ball.
Yeah.
So pressure situation, spotlight's on you. He performed. Then it gets iffy. So those are my 1, 2. I kind of get either or. I like Anthony Richardson. I do like Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida. Definitely a project. I don't know if he's NFL ready to rock right now, performing well, but do the human highlight reel. And again, another guy with a ton of upside.
Yeah.
Mobile, quick, vision, arm, all the above.
Yeah, I think that you're looking at, again, we come back to that question we started the show with, do you draft the best available or do you draft, for positional need? You almost, if you're a GM, kind of take the inverse of that and say, do I draft somebody that is pro ready today, who's my franchise quarterback? Or do I feel as though I have a quarterback that I can, compete with for a season or 2 and take the highest upside player and kind of groom him into what will become my franchise quarterback, right? So it's an interesting question because I think what dynasty managers are in a 2-quarterback league, I think what dynasty managers may be a little afraid of with Anthony Richardson is, do we have another Jordan Love situation?
Right.
And so that's the danger is, there's a lot of talk about him going to the Colts. I think him going to the Colts makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. Gardner Minshew's there. Gardner Minshew's not your guy, but he's competent. He can be a game manager for a season. I don't think the Colts can win this year, no matter who the quarterback is. I just don't think they have the personnel. Yes, they have JT, and yes, they have Michael Pittman, but outside of that, look, they just shipped some guys out of the defense. They're in a division that honestly isn't very good, so maybe that helps them, but you still have to beat the Jaguars, who look pretty good on paper in that division. So I think the Colts make a lot of sense, but what if he goes to Seattle, which is the other place that people are saying he could go, Richardson, and now you're behind Geno with a brand new 3-year contract. Do you really want to sell that contract? Do you really want to get Geno on the bench just to get your rookie on the field? And to me, the answer is, I really hope he doesn't go to Seattle.
Right. Like,
right.
Get time.
Like, I agree with you. Richardson probably shouldn't play football this year. But is a team going to take him that says, forget it, we're going to put the kid in the fire and we're not going to win this year anyway, so let him learn and get a year under his belt, and then next year he's got a year under his belt, versus coming in as a second year, quote unquote, rookie next year with no game experience other than, preseason and, maybe week 17 and 18. So, okay, so you're 2-quarterback league. You have 3 quarterbacks going off the board in the top 3 picks.
I do.
Okay. So selfishly, we are in a league together in a 2-quarterback league. I have the 104. I really need a running back. And as much as I'm a Florida guy and Anthony Richardson's my guy, if Bijan fell to me at pick 4, man, and I need that running back, and I could get Bijan, who's basically a two-tool player, right? He can catch the ball and run the ball. He's a receiver and he's a running back. Man, I don't want to put that out in the universe, but I would be a happy man on draft day if I see Bijan's name there at the 104.
Well, more specifically to our league, knowing our league, having been in the league now for our 1 year,
Yeah.
I could calling. I could. I wouldn't be that surprised. There's a lot of teams that need just about everybody right now.
True. It is a possibility. So I actually I have a little different top 3 than you do, but not that dissimilar. So my 101 for me right now is Bijan. I know people need quarterbacks in a 2-quarterback league. It's obviously of paramount importance that you get at least a solid QB1 and then obviously a competent QB2. If you're fortunate to have 2 really great guys at quarterback position, then you're just fortunate, right? The reality, I think, for a lot of people is that Bijan's too good to pass on. And I think the mentality around fantasy is, as we talked about, I really need a running back. I really need a running back. And when you see a guy like this, if I had the 101, I wouldn't pass on him even with the quarterbacks. And I think there's great quarterbacks. I just think Bijan's too good. And again, we'll see, maybe we have this conversation next month after the real draft and Bijan lands maybe he gets drafted by the Jets where they've got Breece Hall and they've got, Aaron Rodgers probably. And then maybe that's a really bad landing spot for him. Maybe he lands in a place like the Eagles or the Chargers where he's probably going to be the guy. And then you're saying that's the situation I want, where he's probably going to be the 3-down back and get all the work. So I have Bijan at the 101. The 102 for me, I go back and forth on, but I think it's Bryce Young only because I think from a rushing standpoint, can CJ Stroud run? Yeah. Have we seen him do it? Not as much.
Right.
So
right.
I'm with you on the size, but hear me out on this comp. Kyler Murray.
I was going to say the same thing. Very similar. Very similar.
But have we seen Kyler be successful in the league? Of course we have.
Not during
his offensive line? No, he can't. So
Call of Duty isn't going on. There's no like weekend and he's playing too much video games. Then he does well. But right. Yes, same kind of same style of play, same mobility.
And look, I think anytime when you have, and look, this isn't we're not going to turn this into a college football conversation, but look, you don't get to go play for Nick Saban at Alabama because you're a bum, right? It's just not something. Nick Saban is not in the business of recruiting players for charity's sake to just have guys on his roster. He's in the business of winning the national championship. He's not even in the business of winning college football games. They're trying to win the national championship. They're looking for 5-star recruits. They're looking for guys that are going to be pros. So I think when you look at Bryce Young, you say, okay, you came from the most competitive league in college in the SEC. You won the Heisman Trophy. You've been a guy who has won countless games at this. It's not like he just came to the NFL and suddenly shrunk 3 inches and lost 30 pounds.
Right.
He played at this height his whole life.
Yeah, and like you were saying, against the most competition in college football.
Right. I think he's NFL ready. I think that regardless of what happens, I think he's going to be either the first pick to the Panthers or the second pick to the Texans. I think I just have him a little bit higher than Stroud just based off of the rushing. And I think you're seeing that trend now with rushing quarterbacks being more valuable, right? Regardless of, look, everybody wants the Josh Allen, the big body. That's the Anthony Richardson comp. But Kyler Murray was, in the conversation for league MVP. When the Cardinals were really moving and grooving a couple years ago, he was the reason, right? This was before D-Hop and some of these guys. So Young to me is in that 102. At the 103, I have Stroud. And then this is where I get stuck because selfishly at the 104, personally at that pick, and also as a Gator fan growing up my whole life, I want to take Richardson.
Yeah.
I really do. But is Jahmyr Gibbs the better NFL prospect? And that to me is the question. I agree with you. There is no upside, no ceiling like Richardson's, but I find myself in that really unenviable position, which I actually do think I would love to see Bijan's name.
Right.
But I think when I'm on the clock at that 104, I'm going to be staring down JSN, Anthony Richardson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. So It's an interesting debate. Personally, I think Gibbs is the safe pick. I think he's the smart pick. If I'm on the clock today, I'm taking Richardson though. That's the pick. That's my
Ah,
pick. That's my pick. I just can't not have him on my team.
I was just about to back you too on all the Gibbs stuff. Alabama, tough competition, SEC, big stage, plays well, pass catching.
Yeah.
I get the Richardson
So
pick.
let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs. Let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs because I think for me, like we talked about earlier, right? Bijan is in a tier of his own when it comes to this running back class, and then I have Gibbs at the second at RB2, and I have Charbonnet at RB3. What are your thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs? Transferred from Georgia Tech, got to Alabama, took over the backfield at Alabama. Maybe a little overshadowed by Bryce Young because of what he's accomplished, but where do you think would be a really good landing spot if you're an NFL GM? What teams do you think maybe will either trade up for him or potentially draft him in this draft here?
Putting on the GM cap, man. That's a
Yeah,
tough
man.
one.
It's Dynasty, baby.
No, I know. I'm trying to think who would need a running back right now. Someone who's like, okay, because you need a pass catcher. So let me run through it. Like Vikings, no. Shit, Steelers, no. Bucks, I would hope not. Mm, I'm stumped on that one. Someone who, as long as someone who needs a versatile back in the backfield. I want someone who's going to be passing him the ball. He's not going to be getting handoffs every time. He can certainly get the handoff and he's going to do damage with it. But I don't care where he lands, wherever he ends up, they need to pass him the ball. He needs to get receptions. That's, I think, where his bread and butter is going to be. So whatever organization it is, start scheming around passing him the ball. But as far as who needs him, I couldn't even tell you. But I think he'd help whatever team he goes to, guaranteed.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's one of the more interesting prospects in this draft for two reasons. Number one, I think his draft capital fluctuates. I see a lot of mocks where he's at kind of that early to mid second round. I've seen
Okay.
some mocks where he's snuck into the last, four picks of the first round. I also think the team that drafts him in the landing spot really determines a little bit more of his value of where people will take him in this upcoming draft. I think the Bucks are a possibility for him. I think they're a very real possibility for him. They have a young player in Rachaad White. They want to run the ball more. Gibbs is more of the pass catching guy. Rachaad White, not a great pass catcher historically. The place that I think that Gibbs would really be the most impactful is the Bengals. And I see Charbonnet's name come up for the Bengals a lot as well in later rounds for two reasons. Number one, Joe Mixon is expensive. And so Joe Mixon is a great NFL player, but you're going to pay Joe Burrow this offseason because he's going to be picked up for his option, which is going to be a huge contract, right? Maybe one of the quarterbacks that sets the market, depending on his contract or Herbert's contract. I think one of those two will set the new market value for quarterbacks. And if it's me, I think Burrow is worth more than Herbert is. So I think that's an expensive contract. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. And honestly, the rumors that I keep hearing and what I see on the field is I would pay T. Higgins. Burrow loves the pass.
Yeah.
He's great rapport with those two guys. How many teams in the league support two top 12 receivers? The Bengals?
Right.
Dolphins? I mean, I probably could have done more research to figure that out, but those are the names that come to mind. You got, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in Miami with Tua, both of whom are top 12, wide receiver ones for your fantasy team. And you got Higgins and you got Chase. So if you're telling me that Joe Mixon is going to cost $10 million against the cap, I think I would take the rookie running back on the rookie contract who, as you said, can run the ball, can catch the ball, and is what, 1/10 the cost, fifth. So I think at the end of the day, the Bengals drafting a pass catching running back in a Super Bowl ready, offense, man, what a landing spot. What a landing spot.
I would much rather see him on the Bengals than the Bucks, and that's just a personal preference. I don't know what it is about the Bucks. I just don't want to see him over there. I'd rather see him in the the black and orange, man. Bengals, Joe Burrow and him, I think that'd be a great fit. That'd be a phenomenal fit. And cut them some money. They're probably going to go after, I was seeing a tight end potentially early.
Yep.
So then just loading up that offense would be solid, and that would do wonders for Burrow going forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, they signed Irv Smith Jr. this offseason from Minnesota, from your crew, and don't get me wrong, I actually have Irv on one of my dynasty teams, and I think he's a good player. He's been in the league a couple years. He's had a couple injuries. He just hasn't quite developed and blossomed into that player that he was drafted to be. He's still deserving of a roster spot somewhere, and I think he can help an NFL team. But if you're the Bengals, do you use your first round pick on a Michael Mayer from Notre Dame if he's on the board, right? On a Dalton Kincaid from Utah if he's on the board, and then do you use your second round pick on a Jahmyr Gibbs? You know what I mean? Like that's a very realistic possibility for the Bengals to draft. I think the Bengals will draft a running back at some point in this draft. I don't know if they're going to be able to have the luxury to get a Gibbs or a Charbonnet, but don't be surprised if they go tight end running back with their first two picks.
I could definitely see it happening, and I think it'd be Dalton going out that way from Utah.
Yep. It could. I think Michael Mayer probably gets scooped up before the Bengals are on the clock, and I just don't see the Bengals trading up. But yeah, Dalton Kincaid would make a lot of sense. Big body, good pass catcher, good hands, probably available late first round. Saw a note today that the doctors that did his surgery medically cleared him, sent a note to all the NFL teams. So he's
good to go.
Ready to go for camp. Yeah. So Goose, let's talk one thing that we didn't really kind of talk about last night, but give me one player that maybe folks are not aware of, or someone that you just personally like, not the big names, but someone that you're saying, you know what, if I were to get this guy on my team, I'd be pretty happy with.
I'm going running back on this one, and maybe it is a bigger name than I'm realizing, but seems like he should have got a little bit more credit. I'm going Dwayne McBride.
Oh, okay, UAB. All right, so tell us a little bit more.
I think the dude's just a dog in the backfield. Just dog. I was doing some research, obviously trying to get ready for this, and just like some of the numbers I came across. So the last 3 seasons, 3,507 yards on 484 carries.
Yeah.
He gets 7.2 a carry.
Yeah.
That's bonkers. And then I believe he had a bunch of broken tackles. Yeah, 175 broken tackles. The only thing that kind of freaks me out and gives me like an Adrian Peterson kind of a feeling is 9 fumbles.
Yeah, yeah. And so let me ask you this then, because this is McBride's a player that I've actually been doing some research on for the later rounds of the draft, right? Like I feel pretty solid about who I really want to narrow in on my first 2 picks. But as we get into the third round of a rookie draft, which is realistically where we're talking about this player, do you have concerns? We talked about Jahmyr Gibbs and Bryce Young playing at Alabama in the best conference in the country. Do you have concerns about him playing in Conference USA at UAB? Kind of the inverse of that.
I do, especially since you see UAB and you're like, what is UAB? And so you got to figure that out first.
right, yeah. No disrespect to the Blazers fans out there. Let's be honest.
It is maybe not as well versed as I thought I was. So it does worry me a little bit, but I think to consistently put up those kind of numbers, you're doing something right. Like you can't see 7.2 yards a carry and just be like, oh, it's poor competition. Like you got all these dudes on the field to either avoid, help you block, they're trying to tackle you. There's a lot of bodies out there, and you're still getting 7.2. You're doing something right.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's efficiency metrics, right? I mean, look, we're not talking about you're not going to use your first or second round pick on this player. Like our league that we're in together is only a 3-round draft. I'm in another dynasty that's a 5-round draft. Maybe if you're in the 3rd or 4th round, like this is where you're talking about drafting this kind of a player. But look, we've all seen guys that were, dropped in drafts or came out of nowhere and became, something in the league. So at the end of the day, I think if you're seeing results at the college level, unless you're just, playing against the worst competition every week, some of that's going to have to translate, right? I think at some point,
we're back. All right. Connected to my AirPod, guys. I don't know how that happened. My bad.
All good, man. We'll edit that part out. Don't worry about it. So So I'll give you a take on a player that I won't say he's a sleeper. I won't say he's a player that not a lot of people know about, but I do think he's a player that, depending on where he gets drafted, I think right now, if you're drafting today or you're drafting, in the next month, grab this guy now because the price that you can get him for is very low. And I think you're going to see a lot of people rise on him, and that's Marvin Mims Jr.
I
So
like.
Marvin Mims, Oklahoma wide receiver, coming out, blazing speed. I think he's one of those players that, again, he's a little bit undersized. So I think people are going to overlook that. He's not your Quentin Johnston, 6'3", 215, big body receiver. But look, we talked about JSN, right? We talked about Devonta Smith. So I think if you were to find Marvin Mims in the right scheme, as that wide receiver 2 behind a solid quarterback with a big, proverbial number 1 receiver, I think that's a player that maybe isn't going to set the world on fire as a rookie, but is going to develop into a really, really nice, solid wide receiver 2 for you. And that's kind of how I see him, as that wide receiver 2 kind of slotting into your roster where you're saying, you know what, I could get a couple years out of this player and probably have some high upside weeks. And worst case scenario, maybe he's a guy that takes a little longer to develop. Hopefully you have a deeper wide receiver room and you can afford to, maybe let him have those weeks to develop and put him on the bench. But I think you'll see a lot of people are going to like the speed, good hands, really good route running. And I think he's a guy that is going to rise in rookie drafts over the coming months between the draft, the NFL draft and the season. So that's my take on, we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I like that take though.
Yeah. So this is the extra point. We love to finish with a player profile at the end of every conversation. So we had talked last night about a player that maybe one of the more debated players, or maybe not debated enough, depending on what circle you're in. I had picked him out because he's one, he's on your roster, but two, I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about this guy given his last 2 years in the league. Calvin Ridley.
Yes.
Give me as the Calvin Ridley owner, having him on your team, give me your range of outcomes and how you think that this particular season, where do you see him finishing worst case? Where do you see him finishing best case? And let's just kind of start there.
I like him. Just
Okay.
simple. I like him. I think when he was playing, so obviously not last season, season prior, I think only played 5 games or so, but production, it was there. Like he was very productive in his 5 games. Looking back 2020, that's when he was, really popping off. A lot of big games, a lot of fantasy points. I think him with the Jaguars is a good combo. I feel like Trevor Lawrence coming up, going to be in his 3rd year. 3rd year tends to be where you make that good jump as a quarterback. Good strides year 2. I think 3 is going to look better, and now you're adding another weapon to the offense. So I think he's going to be a good receiver. He's not going to be like a Justin Jefferson. He's not a Jamar Chase. He's not going to be doing stuff like that. But I could see him finishing, maybe bold call, but top 15.
Okay, so you have him as kind of that like fringe wide receiver 1, right? Most dynasty or most fantasy teams are in that 10 to 12, manager league size, right? So let's say top 12, for that's the most common. So if you have a top 12 receiver, that's a wide receiver 1. So, okay, so kind of a back end wide receiver 1 for him. So that's his ceiling. Where do you see his floor? How does it
I
just
think he's
go?
going to
How
be
does it
productive.
all go wrong for him, right? Like what happens?
I don't see it going terribly wrong for him. I still think worst case, he's still going to be, I would say, a top 30 receiver in the league.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think he's going to be more productive than some wide receiver ones on other teams for fantasy purposes, if that makes sense.
That does. Okay, so ceiling, you're thinking back end wide receiver 1, floor, kind of that wide receiver 3. But either way, a playable week in, week out starter consistently on your team.
Yes, absolutely. I plan to start him every week that he's playing. If he's healthy, if he's
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm a Calvin Ridley truther for a couple reasons. One, I had him on my fantasy team in my redraft league. in the 2020 season. And I think overall he was like the wide receiver 5 that season. I have to go back and double check that, but let me give you some numbers here. In 2018, Calvin Ridley played 16 games. He was 64, 821, and 10. Pretty good numbers as a rookie. 10 touchdowns and almost 1,000 yards with Julio Jones, with Matt Ryan. 2019, 13 games played. He was 63 for 866 and 7. So fairly consistent numbers wise, but also 3 less games. 2020, the dude exploded. He played 16 full games, 90 catches, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns. We'll say 9 tutties for our Rob Gronkowski in case Rob's listening. So 9 tutties won. And then 2021, we all know the wheels fell off, right? Injuries, the suspension, just only played 5 games. But I think that people are, it's kind of that, did you get burned by Calvin Ridley that season, right? Everyone's super high draft capital, regardless of what type of a format that you were playing in, Dynasty, redraft, keeper league. It's his first season without Julio. Everybody's excited. Matt Ryan loves to throw the ball sometimes to the other team, but that's okay. So
more
often than not, which is why he's going to be on the podcast instead of Sundays. So thanks, Matt. But look, the reality, I think, is that if you were one of the owners that got burned by Calvin Ridley in 2021, you're probably not going to be high on him. If you were
right, yeah. What was like left in your mouth? So you had him in 2020. Yep. You were stoked, man. That's a good feeling. You had him in 2021. Like, well, dang, that wasn't 2020 at all.
So what's interesting about Calvin Ridley, he's still 28 years old. So he's a little bit older compared to the rookies and some, the Justin Jeffersons and the Jamar Chases who have set the world on fire in their second and third year. Well, rookie and second, third years now, but the guy's not old, right? We're talking about Keenan Allen still being a productive wide receiver at like 34 years old, right? I mean, yeah, sure, he's a possession receiver, but I would take Keenan Allen as my wide receiver 3 on any fantasy roster that I have, right? I don't expect him to be the guy that's winning me the week, but I'll certainly take him. I think what you're going to see from Calvin Ridley is going to be directly tied to Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence hype is through the roof this offseason. The Jaguars just made the playoffs. They're returning their entire offense. Evan Ingram signed re-signed with the team. Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence still on rookie contracts. Christian Kirk had a great season last year. So I think you're going to see Calvin Ridley kind of slot in right now is that, for me, ceiling, I think high-end wide receiver 2.
Okay.
I think there's still probably 11 to 12 other receivers in the league that are going to have better seasons than he will. I think that, and that's assuming, health and, max games played, etc. But I also think that the Jaguars are going to spread it around a little bit more. So he may have games where he eats, you're going to get 6, 7 for 108 and a touchdown. You may have weeks where it's Christian Kirk's week and he's, 4 for 54 and you're disappointed.
Right.
But I think if you're looking at Calvin Ridley in a dynasty startup, I would still take him on my roster. If you're in an auction draft, couple bucks, I wouldn't break the bank. I wouldn't, plan on him being, in your top 2 wide receivers. I think he's probably in that wide receiver 3 in a dynasty format. If you're in a redraft league, anything in the double-digit rounds for Calvin Ridley is okay by me. So I like him. I think he's still going to have a great season. I think we're all excited, regardless of what happens, to just see the guy play football. He was a great football player. And, then the mental health stuff. So nothing else. You just wanted to be able to compete at a high level. If he does great things for your fantasy team, you had a great draft pick. So, well, Goose, anything else that we should be kind of talking about before we wrap up on the dynasty, side of things, on the player takes?
I think just that last little bit, like touching back on Calvin real fast. I like what you said. That's heavily dependent on Trevor Lawrence, and I'm feeling hopeful for him because second year with Doug Peterson, getting more familiar with everything, and I think this is the opportunity for all of them to shine. They will spread it out. They have Christian Kirk. They got Ingram. They have some weapons, if depending on how you use the term weapons.
Yeah,
they've got some out there, so they'll spread it out. But I think that's going to give him more opportunity to get the ball as well. So kind of disperse some of the defense, open up the field a little bit, and then hopefully get him open. But yep, I'm pretty high on I'm high on Ridley, man. Or at least I'm optimistic for myself, selfishly optimistic for this season.
You should be, right? I mean, he's a player that, I'll be honest, he was one of the players. I had my notes out last year during the startup draft, and I had circled 2 or 3 guys, and I wrote on top of those names, don't forget about.
Yep.
Right. One of those players was Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick was for the Broncos, wide receiver for the Broncos, had a decent year 2 years ago before the ACL tear with, gosh, this is how bad the quarterbacks were. I can't even remember the names, right? Whoever the heck was throwing him the ball, right? And so and then he got the ACL tear in preseason. Everyone was so high on Tim Patrick because, wow, we signed Russell Wilson and we got Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. So we've got a great ground game. We're going to be just, the Broncos. People were picking the Broncos to the Super Bowl. And then Patrick tears his ACL in preseason. And so we do our dynasty startup draft. And I say to myself, this is still a good player. He tore the ACL early enough that he'll be healthy by the start of the 2023 training camp. Don't forget about this player. I think I got Tim Patrick for like $1 at the last, pick of the draft, right? Calvin Ridley, the same boat, right? So yeah, I like the pick. I think it's a good pick. And I think the other piece that we didn't talk about at all, which you don't really need to go into a lot of detail on, but that division's bad, man. You got the Colts, they're going to have a rookie quarterback and a rebuilding. You got the Texans that are rebuilding with a rookie quarterback. You got the Titans with, maybe I'm hearing rumors that they end up, drafting a rookie quarterback who maybe plays or doesn't, but they want to run the ball through Derrick Henry. Ryan Tannehill's not throwing it over your head 30 times a game. I think the Jaguars win that division. I think they're going to get to play all those teams we just named twice a year. I won't go so far as to say they'll win all 6 of those games because it's the NFL on any given Sunday, but you should win 4 of those games. You should win
should.
5 of them.
You could easily take all 6.
Right. And so those are, look, winning games means scoring points. Scoring points means probably points for your fantasy team. That's fantasy football. So, well, Goose, thanks, man. This was awesome. I appreciate you joining me. It was a really great conversation. For the folks at home that are listening, this has been another episode of The Extra Point. Really excited to hear some of the questions that you have. Feel free to shoot me a text or an email if you want to have a roster breakdown, questions of what you should do for your upcoming drafts, or just general questions about fantasy. Feel free to shoot them over. Goose, man, enjoy. I'm excited to see how this real draft shakes out. And then I'm excited to compete against you, man. We got our own we got our own real draft coming up soon. So it'll be fun to do some mocks and see if we can snag some of those late round guys. Now I got to research Dwayne McBride again.
And I'm ready for the draft now.
It'll be fun, man. It'll be a lot of fun. So, all right, man. Well, thanks for joining me. And for everyone at home, look forward to hearing your questions and talking to you all again soon.